Jordan Peele is an up-and-coming director, producer, and writer who's been making a huge transition from being a fairly well-known comedy actor over on Key & Peele. Very funny skits, by the way. I used to watch that show as soon as the new seasons came out, and I thought they were always hilarious. And it's quite fascinating to see this guy who was hugely into comedy suddenly transition into not acting in horror films, but directing and producing and writing them. And now that we know he's not exactly a one-hit wonder anymore because of his recently released film that could still be in theaters depending on where you are, Us, and his first very highly critically acclaimed movie, Get Out, I think it's safe to say at least this guy knows what he's doing. I was not huge into the horror genre until more recently, but I've seen some bad movies, some good movies, and I think it's now safe to say this guy knows what he's doing. He cares, he wants to put genuine thought into his movies, so instead of reviewing Get Out and Us separately in different videos, which I'm late to the party on both, I didn't see Get Out until a couple weeks ago, I didn't see Us until yesterday, I thought it would make more sense to do kind of one big video where I just talk about both of them and him as a director. And for the record, I have not seen all of the new Twilight Zone series, so I'm not going to be taking those into consideration yet for this video. But regardless, I got some nice things to say about Jordan Peele, so without further ado, let's begin. Now, I would say for a first-time director, the first time he's making theatrical films, he's doing a very good job, and probably not as good as a lot of people would expect someone transitioning from comedy into directing, producing, and writing would do. But clearly, Jordan Peele has seen a lot of horror movies and definitely cares a lot about making quality films, because there's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between Get Out and Us. But for today's video, I mostly want to focus on the similarities, because I'm already starting to pick up on things Jordan Peele puts in his films that I like, that he tries to make them unique, and we'll probably see this in future films he directs as well. Number one, the main thing I enjoyed about both Get Out and Us is that Jordan Peele gives his protagonists a chance. A lot of the time with scary movies, you have to create idiots in order for the horror or the threat to feel real. How many times have you seen those parody scary movies where people are idiots, they don't call the police, or they walk towards the danger, they walk straight into danger, and that's what gets them killed, is them just being stupid, and the whole time you're watching the movie, you're not exactly scared, you're just kind of facepalming going, why would someone do that? I wouldn't do that in that situation, so it kind of breaks the immersion and it breaks the investment you have with the film. And with both Get Out and Us, the protagonists of the film are fairly smart. Sometimes they'll do something quite stupid, or every once in a while there will be an action where you're like, okay, why would this character get out of the car? Why would this character make that choice? But for the most part, there are a few exceptions, but generally, the protagonists of their film are pretty smart, they're clever, and similar to the entire finale of Get Out, our protagonist is clever. He figures out what's going on and is able to fight back and have a chance. And that, I think, makes the film so much more satisfying to watch, because as you're watching it, you're like, oh, I didn't think to do that. This guy is smart. They're in a dangerous situation. There is bad things happening, but they were clever enough to find a way out of it, which I think is far more satisfying and far more enjoyable to watch than simply, oh, that person's an idiot and that's why they're dead. To me, that would just feel like you're watching an overly complicated fail compilation, whereas this is taking the perspective from someone in the film and makes you go, huh, how would I get out of that situation? Oh, protagonist is quite smart, maybe even smarter or stronger than I would be in that situation. In a way, even though this isn't a superhero film, it makes you look up to them as if they are a hero. It's like, wow, they know what they're doing, they got their stuff together, and they were able to conquer the consequences of the situation they were in, which I appreciate. Second noticeable thing I see both in Us and Get Out is Jordan Peele likes having setups and payoffs. This, I think, is a sign of a quality screenwriter, because that means you're writing things into the film that you know you're going to come back to later. This was done particularly well in Us, which I watched yesterday, in which there are a ton of tiny little details they add into the movie that are later paid off once you get to the second act. Once you start seeing the consequences of the plot unfold, you realize, oh, that was foreshadowing. Oh, that was a reference to what was going to happen later. And I think makes the film incredibly fun to watch the first time as well as the second time, because once you know the ending of Us, you're going to watch it again with an entirely different perspective because you know where it's going to go. That I very much appreciate in a director, producer, or overall just a filmmaker, because that means they don't just write the screenplay, read it through once and go, okay, it's good. It means they wrote a basic plot and then went through it again and again and again and said, how can we foreshadow this event? How can we movie warn the audience kind of subconsciously that this is about to happen. I like that in a film because it, in a sense, makes it more rewatchable, which means that you're even more inclined to go watch this movie again, either go out to the theater, so financially, just for your box office sake, it makes a lot of sense, but also just for the viewer's entertainment's sake, it's much, much better for us because we get to go, oh, there's a ton of little details I wasn't picking up on yet. Now that I've seen it once, I can see it again, which just means that two different ways, two different approaches to enjoying this movie. The other thing I will certainly compliment about Us is the soundtrack. There was a lot of thought and effort put into the different themes and the different foreshadows of music used in the film, the kind of intermixing of orchestra and soundtrack alongside pop music that everyone can kind of sing to and get into a rhythm for. I found it so incredibly satisfying. Even though my expectations for Us were not super high, I was hearing pretty good things about it, but I went into it fairly objectively. I was going into Us thinking, well, okay, a lot of people said this was pretty good. We'll find out if I like it. And legit, near the climax of this film, where kind of that trailer music you guys have probably heard from the Us trailer, once they use that music from the trailer in the movie, it's the most satisfying thing to see someone who gets music and gets tone and puts them together in a satisfying and enjoyable way. As a sucker for soundtracks, as for someone who likes to see the use of music put in together with the tone of the film and used almost as a storytelling device, and to see that ignored in so many modern films these days, where music, the soundtrack for a lot of movies, especially horror movies, just kind of becomes background noise, particularly when they're trying to make something feel scary or eerie. They'll just kind of use generic white noise soundtrack that they probably copy from other movie soundtracks, and they don't really put much thought into it, whereas at least with Us, it was a little bit noticeable in Get Out, but in my opinion, Us, it was more prominent. Jordan Peele cares about that kind of thing, using music to tell the story, which I vastly appreciate and I hope we can see more of in the future. Now, I've been praising Jordan Peele a lot today in his filmmaking. However, I will bring up similarities between Get Out and Us that fall a little bit more to the negative side. And don't get me wrong, I still loved both of these movies. If I had to give a letter grade to both of them, I would give an A to Get Out and an A to Us, but likely for different reasons that I'll explain later. But the negatives I'll go into a little bit is the plot is usually a little bit too far-fetched. Not that that makes the film unenjoyable, that's not what I'm getting at, but particularly with Us, once you find out what's going on in this crazy situation and once the answers are all revealed, particularly with this film, I started thinking, oh, wait a minute, what? We're getting into spoiler territory, so if you haven't seen Us yet, please stop watching the video now, or if you don't care, okay, I'm about to spoil the movie for you. Turns out what's happening is there's like an entire underworld underground in these tunnels of people that are quite literal clones of what's going on the surface, and somehow they know exactly what's going on up on the surface, so they're mimicking everything that's going on, but without all of the actual props. It gets very creepy, but at the same time, I'm like, wait, who started this? Who dug a bunch of tunnels and said we need to have duplicates of everybody underneath the country? And also, where do they get all the clothes that people from the overworld are using down below? And apparently there's like one soul that's controlling both bodies, but I don't get much of an origin from it. There wasn't much explained, but I think that was what kind of Jordan Peele was going for. He said you don't really need to get into all the specifics of it. You didn't need to get all the intricate elaborations of why this is all happening. You just need to know it is happening, which I can respect that. There's a lot of movies I like that have that approach, that just say there's no explanation, there's no backstory, it's just this is happening. Like Groundhog Day is a classic example for me. It's just a bizarre phenomenon, you don't know why it's happening, it just is, and that's that. And I can still enjoy the movie. Like I said, Us was very, very satisfying, but once they get down into the tunnels and the main antagonist starts explaining how everything works and why they did what they did, I'm like, okay, this is getting a little far-fetched. In regards to a plot, it's kind of Swiss cheese, you know, it's enjoyable, but it's full of holes. But you know what? I think Jordan Peele is likely aware of that, and he's just saying, we don't need our plot to be completely airtight, and we don't need everything to be solid, and it doesn't need to be patched up of any plot holes. It just needs to be entertaining and eerie, and I can respect that. But if you're asking me to criticize him in any way, that would be it. The plot has a lot of issues with it. There's a lot of things that are like, how would that work? That doesn't really make any sense, and kind of similar with Get Out. If you haven't seen Get Out and you really want to watch watch it, stop the video, go watch it now. But spoilers in regards to Get Out, they find out that this community is essentially taking older people's brains and putting them into black people's bodies so that they can pretend they are black. And it's just kind of weird. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because that's not exactly possible, but Jordan Peele is okay to stretch what's feasible and stretch what's actually real technology for the sake of weird, eerie situation is going on. So moving forward with Jordan Peele made films, that's probably something you should learn to expect. It's not going to be paranormal. There's going to be a weird situation with not a lot of answers, but once the answers do come forward, they're full of plot holes. And it's like, well, that's not how surgery works. You can't just put someone's brain in someone else's brain. You start to go a little bit Black Mirror on us, like, wait a minute, is this the future? How does one guy know how to perform a brain surgery where one brain can take control of another body? That's not really a thing, even though this takes place in modern day. Either way, you just kind of have to stretch the imagination a little bit for the movie to retain interesting and feasible. But regardless, you probably do that for a lot of horror movies, especially paranormal ones where you're like, okay, ghosts or spirits or demons and stuff, they're probably not real, but for the sake of the film, they're interesting, they're entertaining, I want to watch it. So again, not a huge criticism, but it's just something I have come to learn and expect with his films. But to end this on a positive note, the other common trope I noticed between these two films is that Jordan is not terribly interested in the cheap jump scare. Sure, he may use it occasionally, a loud sound or a big jump towards the screen to get you scared, but for the most part, I appreciate that he focuses more on making a scene creepy and not so jumpy, loud noise, kind of throw a baseball into your face and go, ha, got you to blink, I guess you're scared now, I scared ya. He's more for the kind of eerie, let that creepy imagery kind of spill into your mind as you're watching the film. Not one big scare, but just kind of ominous tone and feel of the movie gets creepy. Which personally, as someone who's watched a lot of scary movies now, I prefer that. I personally find the jump scares very cheap in other films, and it feels like the director doesn't know how to make a situation scary, so they're just gonna throw something at the screen and hope that makes you jump using sound and visuals of bad CG most of the time. But with Jordan Peele, he wants to make the tone of the film feel scary, not just throw stuff at you, which I appreciate because I do get scared, but I'm not covering my ears and covering my eyes scared. And honestly, I think that's a better way to scare people. If you're driving home from this movie and you're still thinking about, man, what would I do in that situation? What would I do if that movie was real? That sits more with me than jump scares do. So another great thing I appreciate about Jordan Peele. But of course, I want to hear what you guys like or don't like about him. Do you think he's overrated? Do you think he's getting too much attention? Let me know all that good stuff down in the comments below. And maybe one of these days I'll binge all of Twilight Zone because I know he's hosting that. So I'm very curious to see what it's like. I did watch the first episode on YouTube because it is free. I thought it was decent. I enjoyed it quite a bit. But knowing that Jordan Peele has made both Get Out and Us, let me know what you think of him down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you have an excellent day. Take care.